Welcome back everyone to our modding discussion for Motorsport Manager. Now in previous videos we've taken a look at what some of these changes look like once you get them in game. We've also taken a look at and done a couple of videos to talk about how to change the length of races, how to change the overall speed and capabilities, accelerating and decelerating capabilities of the car, as well as various things with the tires. In our previous video, right before this one, we talked about the various buildings you find in the HQ and how to edit all of the desired traits within each of those. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at the progression for both your staff and the drivers. And to do that, we're going to start by taking a look at your driver stat progression. Again, the files are named very nicely and very plainly so that it's very easy for us to see what each one does. So when we open it up, let's go ahead and blow that up full screen, and you can see what's contained within. Now, again, it can be a little bit hard to read. You got your column headings across the top, and then everything down through here is separated by either commas to delineate different sections or semicolons to delineate items within the same section. Okay, so this is a little hard to read in and of itself. So we're actually going to take a look at this in spreadsheet form. This will make it a little easier on us, just like we did with the buildings, and what we'll do in future episodes as well. So we start by taking a look at, remember, this is about driver progression, and most, if not all of this, will carry over to our mechanics and designers as well. So here you've got everything that a driver can progress in: braking, cornering, smoothness, overtaking, etc. And then under each of these columns, you have numbers that delineate an amount that they can progress. And finally, at the very bottom, the maximum amount that they can progress per day. So let's take a look at how this is broken down. Now, all of this is default information to the game. This what we were seeing in the actual text file, I've made changes to, but in here, I have not made changes to this. I kept it at the default information. So we start out by taking a look at the first variable, which is age. Okay, so my understanding is you can get a maximum of 10 points per day based on your age. So the younger, the better, I believe is how that would work. And of course, every driver is different. Because they all have different amounts of potential, different current levels, and so forth. So it's not a standard formula that just everybody progresses at the same rate. That definitely is not the way it happens. So the way to think of this is you have a certain amount that you can progress per day based on your age, and if you want to increase or decrease that based on the default game value. Okay, then we get into the various HQ buildings and how much they affect how the driver will do. And you can see for the simulator, we have 0, so there's nothing, no effect of the simulator on braking, cornering, smoothness, any of that. So the simulator by default will increase consistency and adaptability. Okay, and of course we see that in the default game if you go to the HQ. So what I did when I was making changes is, as I've already mentioned in previous videos, I decided to make the simulator and the test track the only buildings that improved the driver's braking, cornering, smoothness, overtaking, and consistency. Okay, all of these values are contained only for the simulator and test track. Then we get to adaptability, fitness, feedback, and focus. I changed those to be entirely within the staff housing. Okay, so I made changes to this, and you can see it's very easy to do. Now, you see these numbers down here with a semicolon in between. You're looking at 3, 6, and 10. By default, what this means is if you have a level 1 test track, then you're going to get 3 points per day, maximum, I believe. Then if you have a level 2 test track, it's 6. Level 3 is 10. Now, I've actually tripled those for the values that I'm using. Mine are 9, 18, and 30. And the reason I did that is because Generally, for me, I don't spend 20 seasons in a normal save. I generally lose interest shortly after I win the Tier 1 championship. After I spend all the time getting to that point and then finally winning the championship, I generally lose interest shortly thereafter. So I wanted the driver development to happen quicker. So I decided to triple these numbers and then, of course, consolidate some of this to make some changes. Okay. Then we move down to the next section, which is how much experience does your driver gain from practice and qualifying? And you can see the default values there. Okay. So you can see by default during a practice session, you gain some, you gain a lot in smoothness, but you gain the most in feedback. And that makes sense that the most valuable thing that you would work on in practice is the feedback. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Qualifying, again, you have certain things like braking and cornering that are emphasized over the others. Then you get into the race and you can see the values that will increase in the various categories for that. Then what I find interesting is that they've taken all of the tracks within the game and given them individual values. So for instance, if you go to Beijing, you get a lot of points toward braking, but very little toward cornering. Okay. So that would emphasize that they believe that Beijing has a lot of heavy braking areas, but there are a lot of lower speed corners. Now, contrast that to something like Singapore, which they give you a lot of emphasis on cornering, very little on overtaking. And again, that makes sense because you're going to spend most of your time in corners because it's a street circuit and overtaking is going to be very difficult. So they don't give you very much there. But if you'll notice down here toward the bottom, per overtake. So you get 15 additional points every time your driver overtakes another driver on the track. So a very interesting little bonus they've thrown in. Also, just like with practice qualifying and the race bonuses, you have bonuses for wet sessions. And you can see the maximum bonus there is for adaptability, which is primarily what that particular trait affects. Okay, and then finally at the very bottom, after each day goes by, whether you have a race on that particular day or not, it adds up all of these points, and it's saying that the maximum can be 150. Now, this is another thing. I think I tripled it or somewhere thereabouts. I either put it to 400, 450, somewhere in that range, so that I could get a much higher number per day. So you can see that a race day could potentially be a very good day for increasing your driver skill, because think about it. If you had a maximum upgraded, after the changes I've made, if you had a maximum upgraded simulator and test track, then you also had a maximum upgraded staff housing, then you're going to get the bonuses from all of that. Plus, you're going to get a bonus for practice, qualifying, the race, and then bonuses from whatever track you're on, overtakes you make, and so on. So you could track days, race days could be very beneficial. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is very similar. We're going to talk about the stat progression, not for the driver, but let's talk about the mechanics stat progression. You can see we were looking at the driver stat progression, and there's a lot of stuff in this file. Well, you come into the mechanic, not near as much, and that's because they don't have near as much to deal with. Okay, on there you have their reliability and performance traits. Then you have concentration, chemistry, pit stops, and part fixes. So a lot less to deal with. And by default, only one building affects these. So you have the exact same thing that we were looking at before, where age affects how quickly they are going to progress. Here are all the HQ buildings, in this case, just one that affects the stats. And now, because this is a file that I've changed, you can see that this one file, here's your 9, 18, and 30, as opposed to the 3, 6, and 10 that we saw by default in the other file. I've done the same thing here. I've essentially tripled how quickly they can increase. Here, I go from 150 to 400, so not quite triple, but close. Okay, so again, you can change these. And now I have not tried this, but I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to add additional HQ buildings in here if you desire to make them affect the same way that the driver does. And here, coming back in, we saw the default values before. You can see on the simulator, I am using the default values for the first 5 attributes here, and then zeros after that, because they are not affected by the simulator. But then, because of my feeling that the simulator is nice to improve your driver's skill, the test track, there's nothing better than actually getting out in a real car on a real track. So I've tripled the amount of increase you can get from that. And I talked about that in the introductory video where I showed you in game as well. So you can see here, triple the values there, all the way for the first 5 values or first 5 attributes that we see at the top, and then zeros thereafter, because that is taken care of down in the staff housing, which you can see here. Okay, so very simple with the mechanics. It has the exact same principle. It's just much simpler because they don't have as much to deal with. And then the same thing when you come into the engineers, nearly identical. The difference being that for these, you're increasing different attributes. Okay, so all of those, again, are fairly simple. And just like I did in the previous video, I'll now give you a quick demonstration on once you've made these changes, how do you get this information into the game? And to do that, we're in the asset bundle extractor. For me, the 64-bit version. And you'll open up the extractor and then open up our resources file, which is we've copied into our folder for the asset bundle extractor as well. Okay, give it a second to open that. You're simply going to find, either through searching or through scrolling, you're going to find the exact name of the file that you've edited. So in the last video for us, it was buildings. This time it would be driver stat progression or engineer stat progression, or whatever the case may be. Whenever you find that, we'll just choose one at random here. You go to plugins and you'll see import and export to text there. We want to choose the import. You'll choose your file. And then finally, whenever you're done with all of that, you'll come in and save your main file. Remember, this is our resource assets file. We come back out, it's this file. And then once we're done with that, we would simply drag and drop it over into our Motorsport Manager MM data file. Okay, so I did that in a little bit slower, more explanatory function in the previous video, so I don't want to do that in every video, but that's how you do it. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more Motorsport Manager.